Ricky.
And I'm Joe, and this is Season 9, Episode 8 of the Beer and Broadband Podcast. It's slated to come out on June 8th, 2026. And we've already recorded this podcast once, this episode. And the funny thing is, it sounded awful. We had a bunch of technical difficulties, and we're still experiencing them today. But the recording's working now, and so we're just going to go back at it and rehash some of what we did before. First, we're going to talk about Southern Tier Holiday Cran. It's a 7% ABV beer, and the copy on it says, Small batch series, Holiday Cran brings bright, juicy flavor and a whole lot of holiday razzle-dazzle. A kick of cranberry and orange flavors meet a smooth wheat ale, perfect for making every celebration festive. And we had thoughts on this beer last time that we talked about it, so I imagine it's going to be much the same, but maybe it changed.
No, I'll say having had it twice now, I'm really not a fan of this beer.
Yeah.
I think the combination of the kind of bitter and tart from the cranberry with the acidity of the orange, they all meet on the back end together and just almost like a medicinal thing. If you ever had like a medicine as a child that was orange flavored,
Yeah.
it kind of hits me like that. Where like everything up until just like what sits on your tongue afterwards is pretty good. Like it's smooth, it's got a good like effervescence to it, like it's carbonated well. The acidity really works in its nature before like the bitterness and all that hits you. But the flavor profile just doesn't merge great. I think I would really like this more as just like an orange wheat ale or a cranberry wheat ale and not the two together.
Yeah, the cranberry kind of gets lost in some of that too. Like
You really get that really tartness. Like if
Yeah.
you like have an unsweetened cranberry, like it's not the best experience. It's great in stuff. Like a cranberry sauce is really good. A cranberry flavoring on top of something is really good. Which is where I can see them saying like, oh, we'll throw a little bit of cranberry into this orange flavor. But it's both simultaneously not enough and too much. Like if it was the smallest hint, it would be okay. And if they just unapologetically just went into cranberry, they could balance it with something else. Like this could be a little bit of a sweeter beer. Or they could like even just like some lactose or something. Like give it like a little bit of creaminess would probably sit with it better. It's just hard to handle like bitter, sour, and tart all at the same time.
Yeah, I can see that. I like bitter things a whole lot, so I kind of expected coming back to this I'd even like it a little bit more now that my palate's adjusted to it. There is just something, like you said, about the about the mixture of that orange pithy almost taste in there. I mean, even though they like clearly they use zest, but maybe like they got a little bit of pith or something like that.
There's a little pith with the zest sometimes.
Yeah, or something
They're
like that.
They're using peel or something,
Right. But whatever it is, or maybe they put some like whole oranges in and some of the pith got in there, or I just don't know. Whatever it is, the wheat ale is a finely made wheat ale. The crafting of the beer is good. I just feel like the flavor profiles they mix together kind of miss the mark a little bit on what they're trying to make. And I tried to think about like, what would I drink this with? And I could see it going okay with like a turkey meal or something like that. Like if you were doing a holiday meal and you had those other flavors, especially like cranberries or like you had like a chicken that you had cooked with like some orange and lemon and things like that. It could go well with that, or even like cooking a chicken in that or something like that as like a marinade to bring out some of those like flavors.
Yeah, because it does have that kind of festiveness to it.
Right.
Like they're very right in that of this being like a holiday beer. It feels kind of holiday. And in all honesty, what I'd be interested to try with it is to like turn it into a shandy. If you cut this half and half with Sprite and that you bring some of that sweetness in, you lower all the other kind of stuff, if that balance is a lot better.
Or like maybe, I wonder if orange juice would work with it. Like if you could
maybe,
juice
but at a certain point, I wonder if that's too much orange now, because it does have a pretty decent orange flavor. Like it's very like unapologetically orange.
Yeah. I was just thinking like if it instead of Sprite, since you're going like citrus flavor, like if you got like a citrus juice, like
or like a lemonade or like something like that.
something like
Definitely.
that.
Just
Yeah.
it. I think it really does. It would benefit from some of those stronger, kind of more verse flavors being toned down a little bit. And sweetness does open up a lot of stuff.
Hmm.
Like again, how many people are eating unsweetened cranberries versus people will get a little sweetened cranberry in a trail mix and eat it just like a raisin.
Right.
The flavor of cranberry is good. It's just with nothing else to it other than that other than that concentrated flavor. You can't do too much.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's kind of rough. We'll see if when it warms up it gets any better. And I'll finish this, but I think if I was thinking about it, I think we had given it like a rating from like 1 to 10. We don't really do that, but you would say it's like a 5. It's like a mid tier like beer in
Yeah.
terms of like how much you enjoy it. And I think I had said that I'd give it like a 7, like when we talked last time,
Mm-hmm.
because there are some things that I enjoy exploring about it, but it is more one note. I think I'm going to bring that back down to that 5.
Yeah,
Like,
I think 5's a good spot for it because and this is like an objective 5, not like how like schools go in. If you get below a 70, you're failing.
yeah,
Like it's middle of the road. It's well crafted. The underlying beer is good. I just cannot get behind this like fruit profile they're putting on it.
right.
And somebody else might really like that. I can give them that. If you are that person who does eat the unsweetened cranberries, you will probably love this. You know.
Yeah, I could also do like if they did a different, combination like raspberry and orange.
Yeah, or like,
something
hey,
like
look,
that.
like you put a pumpkin and orange. That
Yeah,
could be
that
good.
could be good.
Even like we just said, even just like the regular orange, if they want a little bit of that like bitterness into it, do like a blood orange or something like that would be really good in there.
Yeah,
Even like a little ginger in this might even just brighten it up. Like put in some like warmer spices.
yeah, it would bring out a
You
little bit
know.
of heat if they spiced it with like cinnamon and clove or
Yeah, or
something
some
like
nutmeg
that.
in that would kind of just anything that gets you away from that last little bit of the swallow is just like such a punch.
Yeah, it's
'Cause-
very tart.
Yeah,
you
because
need something else with it.
I'll tell you, I did not have good etiquette when we recorded a Roadly, and that's why I kind of had to pause for a second when reviewing this, because this is very much, we're taking small sips because this is a strong flavor.
Yeah.
I took like 3 big chugs because I had a whole bottle to myself, and it's like, all right, here we go, and I just got just shook.
It just smacked you in the face with the flavor.
Oh yeah, I'm such a face I must have made.
And I wasn't there to see it. That sucks. Yeah, so I think if you enjoy really bitter beers that don't have hoppy bitterness to them,
Mhm.
this beer could be for you. Otherwise, this beer probably needs something else to go with it. Like you need to mix it with something or something like that
Yeah.
if you're going to try it. It's worth at least a one-time try, though. Because Southern Tier does make good beers, and you might find something that you like exploring in it if you do.
Mhm.
So we'll come back to it at the end and talk about it warmed up. Uh, Spoiler alert, it doesn't get much better warmed up, but we'll let it warm up. We've been sitting here monkeying around with sound settings for the past like 40 minutes, so it's already warmed up a little bit. It's not as cold as it was when I first brought it out, so we'll see how it ends up being warmer. But let's talk about. So I call this solar options for starting energy and cooling off-grid homes, for storing energy and cooling off-grid homes / campers. It's such a long title. The gist of it is that there's this article I ran across where people are taking solar power, they're getting an amount of solar power that is over the amount that they need,
Mhm.
so they've got a lot of loss. And what do you do with that if you could store it in a battery and you could use that at night, but you don't really need a whole lot extra, more battery power.
Yeah.
You're already charging up your batteries to full. You're already doing this stuff. What do you do with that extra loss that you have? What's an efficient way to use it?
Mhm.
And some people have figured out that you can use very efficient condensers and cooling methods to freeze water or some other liquid that then you could use for cooling in a cooling loop for a home or a camper or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And they specifically are talking about ice because ice holds that thermal energy really, really well.
Yeah.
So, um, there's ways to do this, and we do it with water cooling computers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So in our talk, we kind of took it even further because it blends in with the next topic where we're talking about data centers, and them using up a lot of power. But when you're thinking about efficiencies, either you could turn it to this is how I'm going to save myself from having like cooling problems and stuff like that because I'm going to get under floor cooling and heating, and I'm going to use cold
Mm-hmm.
ice to cool during the summer months, and that's how I'm going to keep my slush that's in the thermal loop cool, or I'm going to do something else to store the energy that I'm getting from my solar
Yeah.
generators and my wind farm. Because I mean, a lot of people are thinking about that now. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, even to the point where like the average person probably is not just crazy nerds like me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like you might even be considering solar energy. We've never talked
Yeah. I
about it,
mean,
but
we see more and more houses that have solar panels on like the sunny side of their house.
yeah,
My house, my current house, unfortunately, does not have really good sun exposure anywhere. But definitely, like if you can do it, why not do it? And I do think it brings up a really good point of if you're someone really investing in your own power infrastructure anyway, there are some disadvantages to selling that power back. The rates are generally not that great. They charge you a fee to like even be able to do it in a lot of
hmm,
cases. So even if you're not using any of the electricity, just having everything kind of hooked up is already costing you a premium. And if you're in a big city, it's probably worth to do it. But if you're are fairly remote, like you're doing a homesteading or something like that, well, maybe it doesn't really
hmm,
advantage you to have something like that, especially if you've already got backup systems. Like if your primary electricity is renewable energy, and it's totally fine, I think, to say, hey, but my backup, if that breaks, is like a diesel generator that can get me going for a day or two instead of saying, well, I'll have a connection to the main power grid and I'll pay 25 bucks a month for that every single month forever, even if I don't use it.
yeah,
You're ultimately still very good environmental impact, even if secondary power is not as environmentally, sustainable as your primary energy is. And it is a thing to bring into data centers. I mean, ultimately, they're not running at a surplus, but I really do like that kind of creative thinking of the, hey, I've got an excess of something. How am I putting that towards an efficiency in a system? Because not that it would ever be 100% run without electricity, but it's like a positive feedback loop when you can do something like that. Like if you're generating 3% of extra power every day and you're using that to freeze something in your cooling system, which means your cooling system doesn't have to work as hard for an extra however long a day, well, that compounds, right? Because now your energy draw for that little bit of time is also there. It's still a continued building effect. And you'll always need some underlying electricity just to run it, but you've now made that system more efficient. You are now ultimately netting even more electricity. And how does that compound when we improve these systems? Because we're looking at these massive data centers getting built, which I know we talked a couple episodes about it, and like the huge environmental impact we're looking at for some of them. And I wonder how much of that is really because we're taking traditional data center designs and we're trying to scale them up into massive scaling that really maybe is not the right way to do it for long term. Because this is how I look at these data centers. They're not going away.
right,
We're not, if we build a massive, huge data center running these massive GPU farms, and the original use case for AI diminishes or goes away, or that's not necessary anymore because we make great breakthroughs and they're more efficient now, or whatever, you know, the building has still been made, the investment has still been made. That data center will continue to operate. And maybe they switch from GPU to storage or something like that. That does have less of an impact. But it still has to be said that building's probably going to be there for at least 1 or 2 decades,
Yeah.
having impact. And it's probably worth to try and have some creative thinking of, well, what can we do to minimize? Because when we're talking about like the one they're doing up in Utah, nighttime temperatures around that area will increase by 23 degrees. You know, could we cut that in half? I mean, raising by 10 degrees is still bad. That's not good.
Yeah.
But that's a heck of a lot better than 22, 23.
Yeah.
You know, especially when you're talking impact over, 10, 20 years. And I think that's kind of where I'm frustrated with the whole thing because I feel like people are doing that, right? Like this whole topic is people who are already trying to be more sustainable have found a way to be even more sustainable, right? That they're removing inefficiencies from their systems to improve it even more. At the same time, we're talking big corporations are like, we're about to do the thing with the biggest impact we've ever had.
Yeah.
And I think that's really telling of where society is versus where a lot of money is going right now in this kind of chase for the economic growth of AI. You know, it's not really aligned with what the average person wants to see.
It's very true, and that kind of brings us into our next topic. So the topic is that uh, JMP or PJS or something like that. It's one of the power companies, the major power
Mm-hmm.
companies like Duke and all that on the East Coast, has really bought into prioritizing data centers first and selling them power, and how that's raising the prices, but also causing things like brownouts and blackouts in
Mm-hmm.
areas and stuff like that, because so much of the power grid is going towards data center capacity. And you know, the this type of strategy um, is one of those things where, yeah, right now you can't do it
Mm-hmm.
because the infrastructure is not set up for it. But if you ignore it, then what you're saying is we're never going to try to find those efficiencies. The public are always going to have to suffer for these
Mm-hmm.
things. And even after these things are left, these massive data centers are left, and if they're not running at 100% capacity or anything like that, they're still having this environmental impact. They're pulling in water for cooling, they're doing
Yeah.
things like that. We're not finding efficient ways to keep things cool. We're not exploring geothermal or anything like that as far as like cooling and
Mm-hmm.
heating and things like that. Um, then what we're really looking at is having a inefficient energy consumption when it comes to these locations,
Mm-hmm.
and the public is just going to have to pay for it. And that's the unfortunate reality of these things. It's just not one that I really want to live in. So like I would encourage
Mm-hmm.
people that, work in tech that are designing these things to start finding more efficient things. And someone could say, "Hey, you don't know what you're talking about." Yeah, this isn't necessarily my specialty. I do deal with data center stuff. I work with smaller data centers, but I work with them on a daily basis. I know that data centers consume resources. They consume water and they consume power from the electric grid. And for the most part, we've been able to kind of absorb that into normal usage. It hasn't really been that bad. But when you're talking about massive GPU farms and stuff like that, we run into the same problem that we ran into with cryptocurrency. AI, cryptocurrency, all these things, they require a lot of power to be able to run. And while there are some really good things about that like the decentralization, the more efficient workloads, of being able to have menial tasks done that you maybe wouldn't have done anyways,
Mm-hmm.
so being able to do some of those tasks that like shore up some paperwork or make some things a little bit better, those are all net positives when it comes to either AI or cryptocurrency or whatever technology we're talking about. But when those technologies are used at a breakneck pace without thought on what the environmental impact is,
Mm-hmm.
then you're really just getting back to that point of, what sort of dystopia are we living in? Are we looking to live in like the shortage of everything for the pursuit of profit? Are we going to like some sort of fictional dystopia?
Mm-hmm.
What's the sort of thing, or are we like trying to work towards a more utopian, you know, society? And right now we're not working towards any sort of utopia
Yep.
or anything like that. I mean, not even like a partial utopia or um, some sort of society where, yeah, we have all this technology and we have all these things, but we're coexisting with it in a way that's like more aligned with survival rather
Yeah.
than destruction. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Because, these data centers do not produce, I mean, they could potentially produce a lot of economic value, but they do not produce it for the communities they're in.
Hmm.
This is very different from like when factories came in, because I do kind of lump them in the same group. And we think, hey, if you were a town that agreed for a large factory to be built, there were going to be some environmental impacts, there were going to be societal impacts. It also needed its own fuel. It also would, generally depending on what type of mill it is, produce some sort of pollutant. It would also, congest the town in some degree, needing the needing the various trucks to ship things out or in, or whatever, where on the roads, all that. But in exchange for that, a factory traditionally produced jobs and brought a lot of money into those communities, because the people, even if you didn't work at that factory, people who did work at that factory made money, spent them in shops. It filled things out. And at that point, if you're saying, okay, hey, my electricity is going to get a little bit more expensive, but we all have significantly more money, and because we got this local employer that's putting a lot of money into our local economy, that's not as bad a trade-off. Okay, well, maybe, yeah, there's some environmental impacts, but now food is more available because we've got better resources, or we can take on projects to help reduce those environmental impacts elsewhere. Like, go take a chunk of land that maybe you would traditionally use for like logging or something to produce some sort of economic stuff. You don't need it as much. Well, now that's nature preserve.
Yeah.
It turned that into a nice park. That's a good place for the animals, be a good place for people to enjoy, to be out in nature. You can take the money in that community and do things with it to help offset the data center. The data center, sure, is going to have some human employees, but not very many. How many people, and it worked in a traditional factory, not one of the kind of hyper modernized, almost everything's automated factory. If you go back 40 years, you know, like my father, he was a tech guy in a textile factory. Like, he didn't even work on the line. They had all the people that worked on the line and all the shippers and all the everything, and then they had their own IT teams and they had their own management teams, and all this stuff. It was a pretty significant, piece of business that the local community benefited from. They did not so much. You're going to have probably less than 50 employees, most of which are going to be so hyper specialized they're not going to be from your local community. Maybe they're going to move to that area because it's closer, so maybe you'll get, to tax their income, but that's not going really anywhere else when it's such a small number of people.
Right.
You know, 50 people in a town that have some more money is not going to revitalize an economy. So the people that are in those communities are getting the double hit of their stuff's going to get more expensive, their local environment's going to get worse, and they get nothing out of it.
We kind of end up with the rise of tech in California. You know, the we work for a company that is part of this. So, you know, criticism. This is one of the things that I don't kind of love
Mm-hmm.
about the stuff that we work around. But tech moved in. Uh, you had Microsoft and IBM and all those companies that were out there, and they started raising the cost of living in Silicon Valley and the areas around it, San Jose,
Mm-hmm.
San Francisco, and that cost of living kept on going up. But not everybody in that area was able to benefit from the tech boom.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people were, and more people than what we're talking about from these data centers. But in the end, what that's brought about is a huge gap between like kind of the average working person and then the people that are more blue collar,
Yeah.
workers. And that's what we'll probably see in these locations, except worse because they won't have any sort of economy that's built around like these lower um, people. So you're talking about, there might not be a grocery store or anything like that because they just can't keep it alive in that area.
Yeah,
And then the people start moving away.
I'm worried it'll be kind of worse than that side of it because that's closer to like a more traditional gentrification of an area where like people are kind of getting cycled through. The people who stay that can't work in the new industry, very, very heavily impacted. I don't think the data center is going to even employ enough people for that to be an issue. It's just going to be the slow death of a community that's just getting billed to death.
Well, that's kind of
Right.
what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah, I think ultimately,
sucking all that out.
you're sucking all that stuff out. But at least in like when we look at like San Jose, people who could afford it moved in. Not that that's good for the people that obviously were forced out, but I'm thinking more of just like I know so many small towns like in East Tennessee where my family's traditionally from that are just floundering because they don't have economic prospects. It feeds to this kind of feedback loop of we don't have enough money to improve anything, and because the community is so poor, we can't really hike up taxes to try and get it because then they can't survive here. And it is just this like it's interesting to see some of these towns that I've known for my whole life, enough to be aware of them probably for like 30, that's 6-year-olds, you don't know anything about economy. But then, 6 or 7, you're old enough to look around and say, yeah, this is a city versus this is a small town struggling, based on how many buildings on the side of the road are starting to fall apart and things like that. And those falling apart cities are still falling apart cities.
Yep.
And those bigger doing well areas are bigger than ever.
Yep.
And that divide is just going to really get accelerated when you now are going into those communities and saying, hey, we are going to still jack up your prices. We're not going to tax you. Your utilities are all just going to become more expensive. But there's still no economic prospects for you.
Yeah.
It's just an accelerant to already like struggling communities to just finally collapse.
It's throwing gasoline on that fire that's already happening. We've already been like pulling out of those locations so heavily. So depressing, but I don't know what the answer to it is. Exploring some of the technologies like we talked about at the beginning and some of the strategies like we talked about at the beginning would be good for offsetting some of these things, but ultimately it's not a solution for those things, though.
Yeah, there's not a great solution apart from the very unlikely scenario everyone gets together and just does something about it. It would have to be people driven because we've talked before that government regulation does not always hit where it needs to be, especially because the only reason these data centers are moving into a lot of these areas is because local government is allowing them to, even though their constituents do not want them to.
Yes.
But truly, if it was a fantasy world and we could just all get federal government to do something that was just wholly good, we'd have something in place to tax or feed these data centers globally. Because what keeps stuff like that from happening now, like why these local governments here are not, they're charging reduced costs on electricity or whatever it is to incentivize them to come into the area. Because otherwise it's like, well, if we don't make ourselves the cheapest, it'll go somewhere else, and then we'll get nothing. At least with this, we get the little tiny scraps or whatever.
But if everybody was like, hey, we're not going below a certain amount,
exactly,
then they would have no choice. Even if they were like, no, we'll go to another country. If that other country was like, hey, we're not going to go below a certain amount.
Which a lot of countries do, to build this sort of stuff, you can't just, you can't streamline it quite as much as we do here in the U.S., which is, that's always been the trade-off, especially here in the South. I know like the big ones over in Utah, but like you look at North Carolina and RTP, RTP's a pretty decent tech hub. I mean, it generally ranks somewhere in the top 10 for the country, most of the time in the top 5. It does pretty good. However, if you go look at the rankings for North Carolina as a state to work in, we are pretty consistently voted the worst state to work in. We have the least workers' rights of anywhere. And that has attracted a lot of big business into North Carolina, which has been good for North Carolina in the economic sense. When you
In
think,
the governmental economic
yes, when you think of
sense,
the macro economy,
not
yeah,
the individual economic sense.
exactly. In the average individual, if you get to work for one of these massive companies, sure, you're doing okay. If you don't, you have three jobs, and those three jobs will just let you go at the drop of a hat
Yeah,
because they can. You know.
and a lot of people in this area are in that position.
Oh
You
yeah.
know,
I mean, the majority of North Carolina is probably in that position.
yeah,
You look at North Carolina, we have pretty strong local economies in these massive cities, and that's it.
yeah.
It.
The job market also is horrible in almost everywhere. North Carolina has one of the worst job markets in
Oh
this
yeah.
country because of that exact thing.
Hmm.
There's not very much worker rights. There's nothing that makes like severances or retention. The government doesn't really have to pay uh, job loss benefits,
Yeah,
and
and if you're
you just
lucky to get them,
are
they're
suck.
minuscule.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just suck so bad. Um, yeah. So, anyways, let's see how the beer is once it's warmed up some. Um, I'll let you go first, and you can talk about what you think.
Say the same thing as last time. Warm, the acidity brightens up a little bit, which does help it, but it's still not good. I mean, I think it's the difference with me between like a low five and a high five. I wouldn't really rank it a different number, but it is, if you're going to drink it, I think a little bit better warm than it is cold.
So, yesterday or Saturday, we had said it stays the same, but we were drinking it a little bit colder than we are now,
Yeah.
and I actually agree with you. I think somewhere around like 50, 55 degrees is where this beer really comes out best if it's warmed up a little bit. Not hot, not like room temperature,
Mm.
but somewhere, where we would consider it to still be cold, but like warmer,
Yeah.
you know, and it does bring out a couple more. It makes it a little bit more complex where it didn't like Saturday.
Yeah.
So I actually like it a little bit better like this. It's slightly less bitter and slightly more complex, and there's some new flavors in there, some new fruit flavors that I didn't catch before. So I, I don't think it's better. It's still got the same ranking, but if I was gonna drink it again, I would let it warm up to room temperature.
Yes, I can agree with that. It is marginally better warm. And especially if you're one of those people that maybe likes these flavor profiles to begin with, that could be a big determining factor for you because the acidity is much more forward when it's warm, which
Yeah,
does lead to that little bit of more brightness everywhere else. The back end is still a little rough, but the ride there is a lot smoother.
yeah. Well, this has been season 9, episode 8 of the Beer and Broadband podcast, slated to come out on June 8th, 2026. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.